Dunning Africa Centre. It's not a place, it's a continent-wide conversation. We shift our focus to the central theme of this month's webinar. Our distinguished panelists and hosts are drawn from across Africa and work in business, academia, and government. Join us every month as we cover the pressing questions facing African businesses today.
Welcome to yet another event at the Dunning Africa Centre, where we discuss current issues that affect everyone and everything across the continent. It's a great pleasure to be here once again, and delighted that we have almost 200 people signed up for today's event. That's really exciting news. It means we are really in touch with the pulse of the continent. At least we hope so. And we are actually, in this particular event, we are looking at the outcome of the American election, which we discussed in our October session. And we asked, how will the outcome of the U.S. election affect us across the continent? How will it affect businesses across Africa, not just from the country point of view, but also from a business point of view, understanding to the average person, to the business operator, as well as to the policymaker, how would it matter? And in fact, we had a very interesting conversation. We had two great speakers. We had Zeal, who is with us today, as well as Charlie Stevens, Dr. Charlie Stevens from Rutgers University. As it happens, Charlie could not join us, or may join us later on, depending upon his teaching obligations. But we have an even more exciting, if it's possible, panel than last time. Let me start off, of course, with Zeal, whose face you can see here, sharp-dressed man, as we were commenting before the microphones went on. Zeal is the founder of Graeme Blaque Advisory. He's been in banking and finance for 24 years, but who's counting? He's engaged in all kinds of activities: treasury, sales, financial markets, derivatives, and he offers his company, the Graeme Blaque Advisory, offers financial advisory services to a wide variety of actors, including, I know, the Central Bank of Nigeria. So a man with man of many parts, and of course many words as well, as we will see. And we also have Dr. Winnie Rugutt-Chebon, who is coming to us from Kenya. So she's a lecturer at the Department of Diplomacy, International Studies at the University of Nairobi. And she's also the leader of the African Center for the Study of the United States at the University of Nairobi. So another great speaker. We're coming in from East Africa. And notice there's a plan here. We have someone from West Africa, someone from East Africa. And to round things up, last but not least, we have Professor Chris Isike, who is speaking to us from South Africa. And he is a professor of African politics and international relations at the University of Pretoria. And he also runs the African Center for the Study of the United States at the University of Pretoria. Again, long CV, lots of publications. We know if we start talking about these people, we'll have no time left. So, please look them up on the web. They're all smart people. So, all with ideas. So South Africa, West Africa, East Africa, all represented here. I'm just your humble guide through this process. When we have a chat function, by the way, anyone with any questions, please feel free to add something into the comment section there, whether it's to make a comment or to ask a question, and we'll aggregate these comments later on as we go through, and we'll try and answer them as best as we can. So let's start, I think, by going back to where we were in October when we started this. And, just to help the audience, we have, as it happens, there's an article published which summarizes the debate, and we'll put that in the chat function for you to have a look at, which summarize. But I know we have our sharp-dressed man here, so let's go to him straight away and let him summarize the highlights of the October webinar. Over to you.
Thank you very much. You've made me feel like I need to apologize for wearing a tie and a shirt. I don't normally do this, but today I really, really had to. Thanks, Prof, and thanks for everyone for joining. Before we came on, we said it's really important that we put up the link to the webinar. The summary, there was an article in, I think it was Business Day in South Africa. They had a summary of what we discussed in October, so that it doesn't sound like we're just looking at what Trump has done and saying we predicted it. So the article is there in the chat. But there are 5 or 6 key things in October, and I'll go through them very, very quickly. I think we started by saying that, well, certainly we were sure that under Trump, there will be significantly more uncertainty. He wasn't going to be as predictable and conventional as we expected. Needless to say, we said just expect the unexpected. And even though in October it sounded very cliche, I think 1 month into the Trump presidency, I think it's abundantly clear that the limits to what he can or will do are timeless, to say the least. The other thing we did say in October, we expected at the time that there would be significant tariffs against China. We also expected that other countries would get some tariff increases. And we said that the reason we anticipated that was we expected that there would be tax cuts to the higher earning group of Americans, the wealthy, and to offset the deficit caused by the tax cuts, he was likely going to impose tariffs against China and other countries. That was our assumption. Well, the tariffs happened. I think the tax cuts as an excuse hasn't yet happened, but let's see. I mean, it's 1 month in the 48-month presidency, so there's a lot of time. We also did say that the tariffs against China may introduce an opportunity for Africa, in the sense that it may therefore make China shift some of its manufacturing into Africa, so that if you're exporting into the US from Africa, then you don't suffer the tariffs against China, and there may be a benefit regarding AGOA. However, we also did say that the probability of AGOA being renewed in September was significantly lower under Trump than anyone else, because he prefers bilateral transactions as opposed to multilateral. Now, seeing what he's done regarding South Africa, and when you consider that from 2021 from 2001 till about 2022, roughly 20 years, there's been about between 100 and 105 billion worth of exports under AGOA from Africa into the United States. Roughly 50 to 55% of that, that's non-oil, by the way. 50 to 55% of the non-oil exports from Africa into the US on AGOA is from South Africa alone. So again, with that volume, with what's going on between the US and South Africa, further reduces the probability that AGOA will be renewed as is. If it's going to be renewed, there's going to be massive tweaks. We also said that it was, I won't say time, but we spoke about the fact that Africa needed to develop a strategy as opposed to suffering the consequence from these actions. And that deliberate strategy was something that we said Africa needed to start looking into very, very aggressively. And yeah, we also did say that there would be significantly more marginalization for Africa, that he was going to focus on China, Ukraine, and the Middle East. China, we've seen. Ukraine, certainly, I mean, the video from a few days ago, we've seen. Middle East, I think that is still brewing. He has his hands full right now, but I think that's certainly going to happen. The one we didn't see, and I'll be very quick to point out, I don't remember us discussing what he did against Canada. That was a bit shocking. I didn't expect that at all, but so that's a brief summary of what we did and what we said in October. We're back here in February to discuss what next. That's it for
March, by the way, but anyway, yes.
March, sorry, my brain is a few days slow. Yes.
No, but it's as I suppose the shock and awe tactics of Trump are really to blame here, because I wake up in the morning, I turn my phone on, and I see what he did last night, while I was asleep, and I'm kind of disappointed almost when he's only done a few things and he has not made some new major policy decision off the cuff. I mean, it's really, I think the shock on all tactics is, kind of, he's take no prisoners. Every day he has to do something that is outsized and extra large, and really, I mean, the point, of course, is that initially, in the first term, many of us thought that he was just making noise for noise sake, but it turns out in the first that he just, whatever he said, he did. I think that Zeal pointed this out in the previous webinar. And this is unfortunately what is happening again. He is more or less doing whatever he has said he would do on the campaign trail. He hasn't felt the need to control himself, or kind of temper his actions in any way. He's gone for the whole hog, and almost everything he said and more, just to make sure he has the news coverage. And at least in terms of news coverage, he's definitely winning he's making America great again. So this is true, and no, I think this is really kind of fascinating. Now, one of the things I discovered in the last few days while I'm preparing for this is that politics is local everywhere. So every country's newspapers, and they tend to focus on things that matter locally. So if one wants to find out what's happening in different countries, one has to go and look at their newspapers. Thank goodness for the internet. And this morning, I was looking around. I realized I didn't understand how other people were seeing different things. Now, of course, and that's where we have one of the reasons why we went for 3 speakers from 3 different parts of the continent. So what I want to do now is turn our attention to how have things been received, actions, immediate reactions to Trump on the ground from each of the 3 regions. And in some cases, I think that it hasn't mattered as much. In other places, it has been a shock and awe thing. And I think we start with Kenya, where at least it seems to me that the effect is much larger, given the very kind of chummy relationships between Kenya and United States just a few months ago in the previous regime. So over to you, Winnie.
Thank you, Professor Narula, for that. So Kenya is an interesting space because just last year, during the Biden administration, Kenya was given this, special state visit. President William Ruto was in the United States for what seemed to be a very historical state visit. And when you talk about how very local our reaction is, Kenya's is equally special. There's a lot of questions about, okay, so what next for Kenya? Because this is a new presidential regime. Kenya was put into this category called major non-NATO ally. And we also have this interesting relationship with Haiti, where there is a Kenyan mission, a security mission in Haiti, supporting America's interest in that region. So the newspapers and people are talking about, okay, so what's next with that? And I think to just first go into that position, we see a continuation of that relationship. The security forces, Kenyan security forces in Haiti, have not been pulled back. They are still there. In fact, last week there was a story of one security officer, the first police officer who has died in this mission as he was dealing with the guns in Haiti. But I think the most significant conversation when it comes to Trump is USAID cuts. Kenya is a big receiver of USAID funding. This is not just because of the country's humanitarian needs, but because it serves as a regional hub for humanitarian support for countries like Somalia, Sudan, and other parts of the region. The USAID cuts have been a big deal here in Kenya, and starting with the healthcare sector in the country, PEPFAR, which is a program that has been supporting many people who are dealing with HIV and AIDS, has been cut, and that 90-day pause has has made even government stop and think, okay, so how we have been quite reliant on US aid support to run our country. And secondly, also it's a conversation about what does this mean for regional humanitarian support within the region? So Kenya is a country that is within the hub of East Africa. You have the war in DRC, the eastern side of DRC Congo, that is quickly going to become a humanitarian crisis. There is the war in Sudan that's also becoming a big issue. And the conversations in this space is, okay, so how will the region support these humanitarian issues? Thirdly is the question of AGOA, and Zeal has talked about it. Kenya is the second largest beneficiary of AGOA in terms of trade, particularly in the textile sector. And many foreign direct investment companies, many multinationals in the textile sector have set up shop here in Kenya, supported by export processing zones. So there's a lot of uncertainty and anxiety about what AGOA will mean. But on the flip side also, the conversation about how will the US deal with, in the event that AGOA is not reviewed. Now, it's a 50-50, this is unknown, but people are now, scholars and policy thinkers are beginning to think about what will this mean for trade and investment. And in the first Trump regime, there was an initiative by the Trump government to support a bilateral agreement, and it's the first of its kind in the region where the US and Kenya were negotiating bilaterally for a trade agreement. It's called the Strategic Trade and Investment Partnership. It has not yet been concluded, the negotiation process, but it will be interesting to see whether the Trump administration will pick this up and finally conclude STIPS, Strategic Trade and Investment Partnership. And will that model be used with other African countries, being that, of course, Trump is very transactional in how he interacts with countries around the world. So that is the initial mood, the USAID cuts, the position of Kenya in the region, and generally what does AGOA mean going forward. So yes, thank you, Prof.
Despite so many years of the pandemic, we still haven't mastered the art of unmuting oneself. One would have thought that Zoom would have developed new technology to overcome this problem. The interesting thing is this morning I was looking at something about how in South Africa they are debating the issue of replacing US aid and increasing taxes to pay for HIV treatment and so forth. I don't know if Chris, you came across this, that the budget has gone through. They're holding up the budget in Parliament because they have to add now 2%. They're threatening to add 2% taxes, value-added taxes, to pay for the gap left by US aid. But these things are having a ripple effect across the continent, and I want to come back, Winnie, to this conversation about, and more generally we'll talk about this. But first, let's hear what's happening on the Southern African end. Over to you, Chris.
Well, thank you for having me on this webinar, and greetings to my fellow panelists as well. Look, in South Africa, and maybe this is also reflective of trends, feelings about Trump before the elections and then after the elections. And you see that if you look at the South African case, there's been a major shift in impressions before and after. Before the elections, there were positive views of Trump and what he stood to represent, what he advocated to Americans, that resonated on single issue basis with a lot of people, ordinary people on the streets in South Africa, for example. And this was across the color divide. There was it wasn't just about, this race or that race supporting or not supporting for any day. The support was broad, but there was also a racial element to it, that amongst mostly Africans in South Africa. Many liked his tough stance on immigration and had made comments on social media platforms. And even some government officials talked about how they wish the same, could be replicated in South Africa. And then considering the, African focus of xenophobia in South Africa, what we have termed to be Afrophobia, you can begin to tease out the racial elements of that, sentiment. But there were also those, even across both Black and white populations in South Africa, that supported him on religious grounds. That's believing that he represented conservative or traditional values, if that makes sense. That align with their Christian values, and this was something that he also enjoyed. However, that quickly changed within the first few weeks of his presidency, once he turned his sights on South Africa because of the land question, and his focus on domestic issues and the kind of statements he made. Especially in blocking aid to South Africa, his executive order that on the 7th of February that cut all aid to the country, and also followed up with the fact that South Africa was having racist laws in place that disadvantaged white South Africans, and then openly asking the Afrikaner population to migrate to the United States. Now, this was at odds with the support for immigration, because now this is somebody who was deporting mostly people of color, non-Westerners from the US. And then now, and has his whole election was big on immigration, right? Immigration was a major factor for him. As at that time, there was no talk of racializing immigration. But the minute he was now deporting people and people were still clapping for him, and then suddenly he racialized it by inviting white South Africans to come over, that became clear to actually the Black population supporting him on that single issue. To see that this wasn't really about just immigration, but it was racist, and they started seeing the racist ideation that drove MAGA, and that really decreased support. And then, of course, the land question itself, the Expropriation Act of 2024 that was signed by the president. These are issues that are causing a lot of tension. And a few weeks ago, I think I can't remember the date now, but 2 weeks ago or so, white Afrikaners protested to the American embassy, carrying placards like Trump should save us from the ANC, Elon Musk, our savior, and things like that. Now, I'm just thinking here, imagine if, the Black segment of the population retaliated with their own, anti-American slogan, or even decided, like we see in America recently, to also protest in the same American embassy. That could have led to racial tensions and clashes that can become problematic for the country. So these are the issues that are beginning to shock a lot of South Africans, mostly the Black population and Africans who live in South Africa. Of course, we also saw the action of the Foreign Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, as well as the Treasury Secretary boycotting the G20 ministers meeting, foreign ministers meeting, and finance ministers meeting that took place in Johannesburg and Cape Town. And citing, especially the Secretary of State, citing the expropriation question as the reason for his boycotting attendance. Of course, they eventually did send a low-level officer compared to Marco Rubio attending. I think that was the charge d'affaires of South Africa of America to the US, who did eventually attend the meeting. And I think last I heard, she has also actually abruptly resigned. I don't know whether that was in protestation to the kind of policies we are seeing from Washington, D.C., but these are things, that are happening. And then there's now talk about, South Africa being removed from AGOA. If at all that continues, very unlikely that it will continue. And yes, I've not heard the news about South Africa now trying to, increase taxation by 2%. I don't know if you are talking about the VAT. The VAT, the proposed increase by the Department of Finance, the Treasury Department, was what led to a breakdown in talks that led to the inability of the finance minister to present his budget speech 2 weeks ago. There was a proposed increase in VAT that had nothing to do with necessarily using it as a stopgap to cushion the effects of PEPFAR and U.S. courts on humanitarian aid that come to South Africa. But it was flatly rejected. And after lots and lots of negotiations, last I heard, there was not going to be a 2% increase because it was not accepted by all parties, including the governing coalition, and not to talk of the opposition. So I'll be surprised if they brought it back on and it passes this time.
Thank you. That's very, very useful. And in fact, we start seeing, some parallels in common. I was quoting a Financial Times article of this morning, so where there was some argument along the lines that it had to do with the making up for the drop in the US aid thing. But anyway, they may be wrong. I don't know. But what is interesting, and I think that is that Trump in the first administration, and someone in the chat function pointed out that, we really need to look at how he did things last time to understand what he will do this time. Because, there's no reason for us to believe that he's a changed man, or that he actually has found God, which we can say for certain he has not. But he has a preference for bilateral agreement, and this is not just Trump. To be fair, it has been going on in the U.S. for almost 2 decades now, that there's a movement, the U.S. away from multilateral arrangements to signing BITs, bilateral investment treaties, everything bilateral. But Trump is especially inclined to doing that. So he doesn't believe in allowing people to negotiate as a collective. Which is also what is happening with the EU. He's made it very clear that he doesn't see the point of the European Union, because this way he can bully individuals as best as he can. So I think this is rather interesting that this bilateral approach is going on and will in fact change. I think many people are regretting this idea that they should have signed their agreements before January 20th, and I'm thinking about Mauritius in this case, because they had that rather large renegotiation, and then they foolishly waited for the elections to take place, and then not only that, but they went to the wire. So now Trump has to sign it. I think one of the interesting things before we come to West Africa is that we are really looking at the next level, next couple of weeks, which is going to be interesting, is reciprocal tariffs, which are on the horizon. And I think by reciprocal, this is where I suspect the AGOA thing may die, because he believes that it should always be reciprocal. Whatever you charge me, I should charge you. There should not be any special relationship. The reason I thought of this was this morning, his so-called best friend in India, the Indian Prime Minister, they are all in shock because he has announced that India is going to suffer the wrath of Trump, and that they should pay more tariffs. Of course, whenever in doubt, you attack people with tariff. So now they are getting concerned that why is this happening to them as well? And I suspect it will come back to us in Africa with MAGA affecting AGOA. So maybe it'll become AGOA at this rate. I'm not here for the comedy, but we now turn to Zeal. Tell us the West African perspective.
To be very honest, I'm not even sure I'm competent to speak for West Africa, but within my circles, I think there hasn't been as Unlike what I expected, to be honest, during the elections, there was a lot of talk around the benefits, pros and cons around the Trump presidency. But after he won, after the markets did what they did, after cryptocurrencies did what they did, the only significant noise that I came across, and I'm emphasizing within my circles, was I won't use any adjectives, was the issue around the Trump insisting there are only two genders. There was a lot of noise around that. People were very happy. I know, like I said, I won't use any adjectives to describe what I think about it, but that's been the most, in my circle, that's been the most significant stuff I've seen. I do know that in some other smaller circles, and I understand those circles are not really the average. There are very major concerns around the implications of what he's doing regarding trade for the sub-region. The fact that the sub-region, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, hasn't really helped as it should since it was signed. There's some talk around the possibility that maybe what's going on America against allies would make Africa realize that this is a time to make sure that all of those things are done more cohesively. There's also the issue around the possibility that in Trump trying to, for lack of a better word, subdue a lot of quote-unquote bigger countries, it does not look like he's having his way as he would like. There is a possibility that we would become the proxy. And so I know there's one group we belong to where we looked at the volume, it was with us here as well, the volume of trade Africa is doing with China, the volume of investments China has in Africa, and the risk that Trump goes really way out and says, if you're dealing with China, then these are the repercussions, because Africa is not going to be able to extricate itself from dealing with China. And so those complications are things that I think are still top of mind, and I'm not really sure we've been able to figure out a way how to address it.
If I may,
go on.
Yeah. No, so the reason why I'm interjecting now is because although I've lived in South Africa now for 21 years, I'm originally from West Africa. Any people can guess where that is. I'm in West Africa that I come from. So I know a bit about Nigeria, and I did follow those people's sentiments during the elections, across social media and interactions with friends, personal communications with other scholars. And I think that there were different strands of support, for Trump before the elections. And I don't think that it has changed that much in Nigeria particularly. One of those strands was along conservative values, again, like I said, about amongst Christians in South Africa, Christians in Nigeria who believe that, Obama, Biden were going to be the next 666, if you know what I mean. If you're a Christian, the next devil, that's the easiest way to say it. And because of the liberal nature of their policies, and if you look at how Obama tried to force gay marriages in Nigeria, and how many believe that the refusal of President Jonathan in 2013-14 to legalize gay marriages in Nigeria, for example, which the Obama administration considered as an egregious abuse on human rights, was a major factor why he supported Buhari against Jonathan. And many people have not forgiven that. But there are those who believe that Trump represented, Christian values in that regard, represented what Nigeria stood for in that regard. And then there was also the, if you like, ethnic and self-determination strands amongst the Igbo-speaking people of Nigeria, because of the kind of things that Trump said in his first term about human rights abuse that targeted not just Christians, and that was also another reason why Christians supported him, but that Trump was somebody that they could appeal to, in the fight for self-determination. Now, this is not something that is amongst a lot of people, but it's there, right? So Trump was carved. And then recently, just yesterday actually, at a conference, I'm actually in London, King's College London, where we had a conference, Africa Week conference, and there were discussions around the Sahel. And somebody talked about the role of Russia's misinformation and disinformation in the eastern part of Nigeria, broadly, through Sputnik radio. Okay, and that the Sputnik radio was a major influence in how people saw Russia, and it was a soft power tool that Russia was using to change a lot of minds about Russia, and that's why you saw during the protests against the government, a lot of northerners in Nigeria were waving pro-Russia flags and pro-Russia, placards. Now, it was the first time I was hearing about that, and that really shocked me. So I spent last night finding that radio, listening to it, and it shocked me to see that part of the you can call it information, disinformation, or misinformation, but part of the whole news that radio carried was that Trump and the Republican Party was better for Hausa people in Nigeria. So the question then is, I was now asking myself, is how much impact does that have? I know it will not have affected the election in any way, but affecting perceptions and people seeing Trump. But then the contradiction there is that Trump would say, like he did in his first term, that he would sanction the Nigerian government if they were doing bad things, according to him, against Christians in Nigeria. So these are really complex things, but there are many reasons, varied reasons in society why people, supported him before.
Well, I mean, it is, to use an old phrase, divide and rule. It is his preferred tactic, and I have to say, successful in America. He has polarized society quite thoroughly. In fact, seems to be his preferred model. I also think that you're right. I mean, this idea of kind of, even within Europe, the kind of trying to get comment on domestic political issues, German elections, and so forth, U.S., United Kingdom, and so forth. So they've been interfering and commenting where normally foreign governments don't normally put their nose too much into. They let a junior person speak, perhaps, but they will never. No one at the cabinet level would speak. So I can see this happening across the continent, and I think it's really interesting that he's kind of flaring up old wounds like Biafra and and the Afrikaner movement, things that we thought had become dormant and sleeping giants, so to speak, popping up again, which is not good. Boko Haram, I'm sure, will come back in the conversation at some point. So, but anyway, we are not here to talk about that. Our focus really is on, I want to keep it on the business side of the story. His social effect is another story entirely. Now, one of the things I want to just come to Winnie about, textiles. So one of the things that has happened during the last is kind of the small scale manufacturing in textiles, for instance, in Kenya. That's something that this is a sector that depends quite a bit on the U.S. If I'm not mistaken. Perhaps you can say something about that.
Yes, of course. So you're quite right. Textiles, AGOA in Kenya, the greatest beneficiary has been the textile sector. And this is a sector that has benefited a lot from external foreign direct investment in the textile sector. So you will find that it is not necessarily indigenous Kenyan businesses that are doing this business. It is a sector that is supporting foreign entities, Levi's, the common brands, Nike, and that has had a big effect on employing quite a number of people through export processing zones. And so a reduction in funding and also the closure or the end of AGOA will have a huge effect for the Kenyan economy. But I think also circling back on what trade and investment will mean with this new term of administration is generally how global tariffs and global instability from the Trump administration will impact African markets. How will this impact prices of goods and services? How will this impact an important thing like oil and petroleum into the country? And so that uncertainty is causing a lot of businesses to think of what next in this era. But also, secondly, there could be opportunities, and I know we will discuss this further on opportunities. But Zeal has talked about, the fact that a lot of economies have been interacting with China, and as we see that shift with the, I was just watching the the canal matter, and the fact that if you are interacting more with China, you could have higher tariffs, and tariff is becoming a tool of engagement. So there's a lot of shifting parts, and we still don't know what's for sure going to happen next. But for the textile economy and generally AGOA and trade, this is a big factor for those here in Kenya.
Yeah, no, I think this is the numbers are certainly significant, and it's coming up for renewal. So I think that my feeling is that this will end up going the way of the reciprocal tariffs, that he will want to see that there will be little or no benefit, perhaps only in the resource sector. I don't know. That's depending upon the lobbying of the big mining companies and so forth. But that brings me to and I want to come to the China thing, because I think that China story is really quite large as a effect, because as you know, Africa has most African countries have a fair amount of engagement with China in terms of loans. In fact, Zeal sent me a very interesting link with the data on Chinese loans. For instance, Angola, which was the largest recipient of loans, they have $48 billion worth of Chinese loans, which represents almost 55% of GDP. Just one country. So we're looking at a massive amount of debt across the. So to some extent, really, if China is kind of sanctioned, and if you are friends, you cannot be friends with China and be friends with America, and will it push? So I'm wondering what the equation is, whether we'll see countries trying to increase their engagement with China or actually step back because they want to be, not to get face the wrath of Trump for being close to China. It's a kind of a balancing act. Where would you go to? Let's start with Zeal. What do you think?
Well, I think that's like asking someone, would you prefer to be shot in the head or shot in the heart? I don't know what the answer is. Like I said, Africa as a whole has been, there's a lot of Chinese investment in Africa, a significant amount of it. Now, the thing is that and I know as we say, nature abhors a vacuum. There was an infrastructure, there is still an infrastructural vacuum. Africa has not really been able to fill that vacuum by itself. That's a different conversation for a different webinar. The Western countries were not filling it how they used to fill it 50, 100 years ago, before most of the African countries got independence. So that vacuum exists, and China has taken advantage of it. We may not like the manner in which it's done, but that's a vacuum that needed to be filled. Now, if you put the African countries benefiting one way or the other from China in the dilemma where they have to pick, the question is, if they pick anything other than China, do they have the capacity to fill that vacuum themselves? And whatever else they are picking, will what they are picking have the capacity to fill the vacuum and repay China? I think the general answer would be no. So it's a really, really difficult position to be in. And like we said in October, October, the thing that we haven't done as a continent that we should be doing is that we shouldn't be putting ourselves so much in the situation where we're discussing the consequences of other people's actions on us. We should be part of that negotiation to make sure that we're not a consequence, but we're a player on the table. We haven't done that. So this kind of question is very apt, but I don't think there is any actual answer to that.
Well, the point here is that if, like, this gap in the budget in terms of covering the cost of US aid. Now, there have been several articles coming out in the last few days that, okay, everybody's moving to a transactional relationship when it comes to aid. It's happening in Europe. The UK, for instance, has moved to that, and most Asian countries have a transactional approach. Aid is part of foreign policy. It's not necessarily separate from that. You are using aid to support your investment activities. You're using aid to support your foreign policy objectives. And the idea of aid for the sake of just trying to do the right thing to help with, let's say, medical problems and so forth, is becoming less significant. And what's happening is the private sector jumping in. So you have the Gates Foundation, you have the Mrs. Amazon, I forget her name, Scott, I forget her name. But anyway, she has put 8 billion, filling in the gap for some of the USAID investments. She is putting some money into there. The point is then that, can the private sector really come and take over that spot? Will it become something that will happen? And I know it's a short-term fix. It's a band-aid to a very deep wound. But nonetheless, there is something that is going on in this regard. But in the bigger scheme of things, borrowing money. So if you don't get those small things, the bigger thing is, where do you're borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, so to speak. Can you take money the Chinese will be happy to lend you money to pay off your the debts that are called in now from by the Americans and so on, and if you see what I mean. Do you think there's this possibility that we'll end up having to again borrow from Peter to pay Paul, borrow from Chinese to pay the Americans, and vice versa?
But Prof, if you don't mind, let me chip in there. There's something I think it's a perspective I have that's very controversial, but it
go for it. This is the place.
Apart from the fact that we mistake US aid to represent aid to Africa because of the name, they did, well, let's just say money was flowing from the US through US aid into Africa for different reasons. While that has stopped, Trump has proposed to start a different flow of money in a manner that gives US companies a benefit. So US aid was not giving any direct benefit to US interests. If you remember, not too long ago, Trump said it's okay for US companies to bribe African countries to get business. In which case, what's going to happen is, instead of the United States pumping money to the general public through government to help the society, quote and unquote, you can now give this money to individuals in exchange for a commercial benefit. So it's something else that we need to look at. The flow of money may not change, but the pockets in which it ends up and the reciprocity for which the money is sent will certainly change.
Okay, so inequality will rise whichever way we look at it, is what you're saying. It's okay, now I'm saying it. Okay, Chris.
Yeah, I didn't want to say, I wanted you to call me first, but I just thought this is an opportunity to maybe disagree with Zeal a bit.
Okay.
One statement, and then agree with him on the other. The point of disagreement is saying that US aid was not serving American interests. That is not entirely correct, but it depends on where you are standing, right? So if you are a Trumpist with a transactional or deal-making approach to foreign policy, you would say that and get away with it. But if you look at it from a soft power point of view, the US aid was America's biggest soft power instrument globally in shaping perceptions favorably towards the United States. And cutting it now only serves to make people understand the value of the tail of a cow. They say until you cut the tail, the cow never really knows that the tail is useful in starving off flies. So to that extent, I say it served American interests greatly. Let's even forget about the conspiracy theory that has been thrown by Republicans that it was used to fund Boko Haram and the like, which can be argued to even further American security interests in some ways by causing destabilization. But that's conspiracy theory. But just looking at soft power value, it helped America's interests significantly. And I can tell you that one of the things that have kept America as world leader for so long is not necessarily its hard power. It is its soft power. Yeah. And that is the reason why you see Russia struggling, battling, even China battles, because they don't have that much of soft power. Especially in Africa, when you look at the role that the diaspora population plays. So that's one point. The second point, and that I agree with you on, is the question of the US now. I've spoken to US diplomats in the State Department. I did in the US in South Africa. And one thing I heard, and this was, by the way, before the elections, and then immediately after the elections in January, come from my conversations with all these people, I could tell that something was changing. The State Department is now beginning to ask themselves, why should we as the United States continue to give aid to Africa when we can get as much as China is getting from them without giving that same amount of aid that we're giving? The Chinese have been very transactional in their approach to Africa, and they get more. But on top of that, the Chinese get more respect from African leaders and even Africans than the US was getting. So, for example, you will hardly find any African leader or any African opposition leader, political party, or even scholars coming openly in the public fora to criticize China. But we made it a duty, it was almost a habit to freely criticize the US as the imperialist, this big power that is trying to dominate things. We spoke about those very freely, right? And so the Americans were asking themselves, and this is what tells me that it may be something that will be beyond Trump, because it's easy to say this is just Trump's transactional foreign policy. But no, before he was elected and immediately after, they have started asking the question of, should we not adopt the Chinese way of dealing with Africa, where we don't give aid? Even if we give any aid, it will be based on what Zeal is saying, what can we get? That's why what you are saying about giving money to even bribe companies in Africa is not going to be legitimate, because they say that those underhand tactics, those are the kind of underhand tactics that China deploys and is working, and that on top of that, it earns them regard and respect, which the US doesn't get. So this is something that is probably now going to frame. Nobody talks about it officially, but there is going to be, we are beginning to see a change in US approach towards Africa. And that's why I really believe that, AGOA is gone.
Yeah. Winnie, do you want to add something here?
Yes, I do. And I truly want to agree with Zeal and Professor Isike that, I believe aid will always be there. It's just a restructuring that is happening. Perhaps the amount will reduce, but US aid will continue to support its country's national interest. And just circling back to textile, because that's an area you asked me at the beginning. If you look at the aid, US aid coming into Kenya, other than aid going into the health sector, the second place it was going to is manufacturing. And you'll find that the support that financial assistance was going to was to support businesses that will enable American businesses to tap into the economy. So the textile that's coming out of AGOA was going back to the US. And this is, again, American companies like Nike, Levi that are benefiting from this manufacturing plant. So the aid at the end of the day always circles back. And my thinking about this, just in line with Zeal, is that what is happening is a restructuring of the priorities of where that money will be going to. For example, here in Kenya, for the last 2 years, there's a big IFC, International Finance Corporation. DFC. This is a international United States Financial Credit Agency. It gave a big loan to a company called Basigo, which does electric buses. So we have electric buses there in Nairobi, in our interesting roads. And of course, that type of financing will go out of the window when it comes to the Trump regime. And it could go, interestingly, to tech. We know Elon Musk is close to the president, and Kenya is a big country when it comes to technology and digitization. We call ourselves the Silicon Savannah of the region. And so you could see that financial assistance going to support the tech industry. And so I'm just thinking there'll be a restructuring of where the money goes. Yeah.
Yeah, I think these are all valid points, and I think we're going to. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of we are speculating, and we're not really we don't know what. Nobody, I think, knows what is in the mind of Trump, and I think this is part of the problem. Uncertainty. I mean, he's driving up uncertainty at every level, and this is sort of. But I also see that he sees nothing wrong with regulatory capture, or and to bribery and so forth. He doesn't. So the normal, shall we say, moral boundaries that we have come to expect from. So whether you actually believe they're real or at least talked about, are now being ignored. And of course, this has significant provisions. Now, one of the things, and I want to bring us to, and one of the most important things is Africa as a source of natural resources. This is the key benefit, the key basis for which all transactions with the U.S. come down to in the end. The Biden administration was talking about their corridor through Southern Africa, Mozambique, Angola, etc. They wanted to connect more, which all had to do with resources. The Democratic Republic of Congo has been, again, the question of Nigeria mattered a lot in terms of petroleum. The point is that it's resources that matter. So to that extent, how do you think this is going to play out? Because he does still want people, he has enough people around him who care about the price of oil, the price of resources, the ease to which you can get cobalt or tantalum or whatever it is that you're looking for, or they're looking for. So this is actually an important issue. So how do you see this playing out? Will there be a plan? Will the planned corridor or something similar happen? Will there be investments associated with that? Does anybody have any thoughts on this particular thing? Where are we going? Because most governments are thinking this is their card when it comes to Trump, that he wants to have their resources, so then they have some bargaining position with Trump. Is this true? I mean, let's start with Winnie on this point.
Sorry, I'm just trying to unmute myself there. As you were talking, I was just trying to remember whether it is this week or last week. I saw a story in our local dailies where DRC Congo, Tshisekedi is looking forward to approaching Trump and negotiating an agreement on how to get support in reciprocation for his resources, and this is support for the war in Eastern DRC. And I thought that was very interesting that our leaders are already quickly thinking, okay, what next in terms of negotiation and how they can use their resources to win their wars like DRC. But number two, as you're speaking, I was again thinking about what this means for China, being that this is very transactional, and parts of the region like DRC are negotiating with the whole world. So it's not just about the US, it's not one or the other. And my thinking about this is that this is an opportunity for African countries, or at least regional powers or regional blocs, to speak in one voice. Because if we already begin to have these small niche areas where bilaterally we are negotiating, we're always going to be at the end of this. Then the road deal, we'll always get the road deal. And I know Professor Isike usually feels the same way about the place of regional bodies. So I'll stop there.
Chris, you're natural next person on this conversation. What do you think? Resources and Africa, how does this change our position or affect our position with the United States?
Well, let me start by first of all telling Winnie to simply call me Chris. You cannot call Zeal on the call and then call me Professor Isike. Just call me Chris because I'll call you Winnie. So get that. The second, yeah,
No,
to answer the question.
Prof. Chris, if you
Yes.
look at all the names, only one name doesn't have a title, so she's spot on. The first thing she sees.
And that is the reason why we must equalize it by just calling everybody by their first name. Makes it easier. So I'm going to say Winnie, I'm going to say Zeal, so let's do it that way, please. Okay, so to answer your question, look, I think Winnie has alluded to this already, and I did also say it appears to me that we're returning to the old bipolar world order. But this time, what Trump is looking to do is align with Russia. So US and Russia, instead of the bipolar world order where you had US and Russia facing off, it's going to be the US against China, but Trump wants Russia to be on its side. And if you listen to the center-right parliamentarian in France, Claude Maroulet, and the way he described Trump as an emperor that was now really siding with Europe's enemy, Putin, against Europe and breaking traditional alliance that has worked for over 80 years, you begin to understand why the US, Trump is willing to break every rule for China. And I think that's because they frame China as their main opposition, unlike the Biden that saw Russia more as the enemy. So that's the first point I wanted to make about this, because like Winnie is saying, that geopolitics between these three countries is also going to play out and affect business in Africa. And I believe that Trump is definitely going to have adopt a bilateral approach to dealing with Africa. During his first term, we saw how he tried to do this with Kenya. The Prosper Africa strategy that he had was solely based on country to country relations and the normal deal making foreign policy approach of I will give you X if you give me this. So he may continue the Lobito corridor, which is mostly largely completed, really, and then look to get minerals from the continent, playing one against the other. And when we talk about what we can do to help ourselves as a continent, I will talk more about the kind of alliances we should be forming within ourselves in Africa, at the African Union level, at the group hegemonic level, to be able to deal with this issue.
Yes, thank you. We're coming to this point. Let me allow Zeal to have his 2 bits here before we move on to that. I want to just say that so Salamatu Isa, who is actually, I think, a professor at Ahmadu Bello University, my alma mater, so I thought I should name drop her, points out that the price of oil has been falling systematically for the last few weeks, which is interesting because normally it goes the other way. When there's increasing uncertainty, you see it rising, and we are seeing it declining. I'm really not certain what the logic of this is, and perhaps if I think Zeal, maybe you want to say something about that later on. But anyway, first to the commodity in general.
I think I remember the Cold War between the US and the USSR. And I've always said that World War III is not going to be an arms war, it's going to be a trade war or a cyber war. Both are being flaunted right now. So in researching that, I found that there was once a trade war between the US and Europe in the 19th and 20th centuries, and that led to the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, which later morphed to become the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade that became the World Trade Organization to prevent the very act that Trump has ignited. I don't think there's anywhere in the history in my own brief research where this tariff wars ended well for any party involved. It just caused a lot of major global distortions. And the whole essence of the World Trade Organization was to ensure that this very issue does not come up again. So we are in very, very, I won't even call it uncharted territory. It is actually very well-known territory. It doesn't end well for any party. If, I hate this if, but you see, if we in Africa had gotten an act right 30, 40 years ago, this war would, I won't say insulated, but we would then be able to dictate a lot of the terms, because a lot of the manufacturing that goes on globally, whether Trump's best friend's company, Tesla, or whatever it is, the key ingredients to their empires come from raw materials that are sourced largely in Africa. Now, the type of, they are doing tariff wars. We should have been in a position where we're talking about we are the ones manufacturing this, and we will determine where we will send it to, as opposed to the conversations of how do you come in to help us exploit us to get what we have so that you can use it. No, so we've put ourselves in a terrible situation. But if we think about this from the manner in which I believe China thinks about things and say, okay, in the next 3 to 4 generations, having learned what has happened over the last 100 years, what do we need to start doing now? We talk about history being a cyclical repetition of events. We're going to get through this, and it's going to happen again. And so when it happens again, how are we going to be in a position where we are not as adversely affected as we are now? That's the position. I mean, I would probably, hopefully, not be here to witness it, but my grandchildren and great-grandchildren should be able to be in a different negotiating position in this kind of circumstance.
So, this is a very interesting point, and I don't really want to go and do a post-mortem of what we have done wrong over the last 40 years. In fact, I feel as the eldest person in this panel here, I clearly remember conversations in ABU about how when our turn would come, we would do things differently. Now, my generation is running Nigeria. The same people who were telling me that, who were insisting that we would do things right when our turn came. We're not doing things right. The turn has come and is gone. In fact, it's going as we speak. But nothing has changed. We are still making the same mistakes. So sitting there and saying, "Oh, we are going to learn from our mistakes," I really don't know. I think I'm losing optimism about this. So, but that's a personal note. What I feel here is that yes, there is the point of how do we, to have a better position and a better bargaining position, you must have something to bargain with. When we are bargaining with commodities, you're not bargaining with anything. I know everyone feels that because we have oil, we have whatever, columbite or whatever it is, that this gives us a capacity to bargain. But it's a commodity. The word commodity by its very nature means it is easily available. It is substitutable. Everybody, your oil is not better than my oil. And there's plenty of all of these things around. I mean, okay, the DRC is being torn apart as we see, but this is something that doesn't give you a bargaining power. It's the thing that matters in this world is is gold. But somebody once told me the golden rule. I said, "What's the golden rule?" He said, "He who has the gold makes the rules." He said, "That's the most important thing to remember in life. If you have gold, you will make the rules. You can bend the rules. You can do anything to the rules you like. But when you can only talk, if you don't have gold, you are just sitting there and you follow the rules that somebody else makes for you." So this is where we are in mostly sub-Saharan Africa. What we are doing is we are receiving the rules because we don't have the gold. We may have physically the actual gold, but we don't have the gold that makes the rules. We have the gold that we sell to someone who makes the rules for us. So all of our talk here, and I'm being deliberately provocative, is, we're saying life is not fair. But why it's not fair and why it has remained unfair for at least 40 years or maybe more is our own inability to recognize that we need to actually think longer term than then the next cycle or whatever cycle it is, or whatever obsession our leaders have about their own bank accounts or their own lifestyle or what they believe they should do. We have to have a nuclear power plant, even though we have no nuclear. We need to have a satellite agency, even though we don't. We can barely make an aircraft. So, this idea that we must do these white elephant projects and throw billions and billions of dollars at them, it really, I can make a list of these things that I've seen in my lifetime and wonder that the level of short-sightedness that our leaders have expressed is not something we can do something about. Ex post, it has been done. How do we go forward and prevent that? Now, that's where we're coming to, and this is where Chris, I know is ready to go and start shooting. So, moving forward, what can we do to help ourselves, given that we don't have a natural propensity to cooperate? Okay, Chris.
Now you snuck in that last bit of your question.
Yes.
I see what you did.
Let's keep it real.
Okay, so let's keep it real. So keeping it real is first of all to acknowledge that we do have the gold, and we do have the new gold, okay, in form of critical minerals that Trump really, really needs. The question, like you said again, is that we don't have a propensity to cooperate. But despite the fact that Trump is going to want to deal with countries on a one-on-one basis and is going to do a lot of deal making, he loves making deals. If we have two choices. It's either we kowtow to what he wants and play by his own rules, which will eventually not benefit us, or we can actually then articulate a common position on how to relate with him. So I'm going to say two things. But before then, I want us to understand that there's a logic to what Trump is doing, except that it's at the end of the day, it's not helpful. And it is called the madman theory in international relations. It's madman theory of foreign policy that was popularized by Daniel Ellsberg in 1959. That says that the idea that an unpredictable and irrational leader would have an advantage in international bargaining. So you can use this theory, madman theory, to analyze Trump's impulsiveness, which has been effective, you could say, to some extent, but has also been destabilizing, as we have seen. So for many of his supporters, his unpredictable and risky nature, they say, he has led to some of his policy success. But you see, again, too, you find out that he chops and changes, right? He's now backing down on the tariffs to Canada and Mexico, delaying it by another month, which he did before. And there was something I was listening to MSNBC analysis, and somebody said that America, for example, would not survive one day without drinking coffee. Americans do not make coffee. All their coffee comes from outside America. So if every country that sells coffee to America was to tariff America, what would that mean for coffee drinkers? Not just coffee drinkers, but for life generally in America. Okay? So it means, therefore, that in his madman theory behavior, Trump is overstating American influence, especially in a changing world where you have different currencies of powers. And I think that this is where an opportunity, really, comes to the fore for Africa. So for me, the first point is, yes, you said, look, it's been more than 60, 70, going to 70 years now, Africa has not cooperated. But we have cooperated on certain issues, and we have been non-entrepreneurs in shaping some of the major issues that define the current multilateral system until Trump is now taking it back to a different system completely. So we've contributed, but I think that the major suggestion I want to make, and I can tell you that one of the reasons why we have failed is the fact that we don't have a Pan-African reach, that everyone in the continent agrees to. We don't have a Pan-African consciousness and identity. Okay, and failure to have that and proper states that function has been one of our undoing, and it is really difficult to talk about common positions, different leaders coming together, to have a collective approach to dealing with Trump, because we have these, various divisions, like you have said. So I would advocate still that the African Union, especially through the African Union Commission, is significant. There have been reforms that they've done, but the new African Commission chair would really do a lot to try and ensure that Africa decides to take a collectivized approach. Trump wants bilateral approach, but we can decide that we will use that collective approach but we do it in such a way that we align with what Trump is looking for. So that way he gets something and we get something. And so what I'm saying in essence is that we have to frame an African message and take that message to President Trump. Okay? And the message that I'm saying we should frame is to frame Africa as America's next big market by emphasizing, the 2.8 billion consumers and the economic benefits of securing trade partnerships, with Africa. Another thing that I think we can do is to actually play Trump at his own game. Flattery diplomacy is going to work for us. Okay, you saw how Zelensky refused to flatter him, and you saw what has happened, right? So I think that we should come together, but go to him with not to say, please continue to give us aid, continue to give us AGOA. Let's not do that. Let's go to him and say, look, we are the next big market for Africa, and let's talk about business. Okay, let's be deal making like him to say, okay, we can give. We know that you don't like China, but we're telling you that your national security interest is tied to China. So if you do business with us, you will get a slice of the pie in Africa, and we can engage with. We can do this not just by engaging with Trump, but also going beyond Trump to look at U.S. governors, corporate CEOs and trade associations to help build that message.
Okay, so let me interrupt you, because I'm realizing that we've been so enthusiastic that we may be running out of time, and I want to give everybody a fair shake. I also don't want to end up talking too much, but the whole conversation about Pan-African identity is something that really we're struggling with. There are a lot of Nigerians in the room here. We're struggling with Nigerian identity. We're still not sure, north, south, southwest. You're from, which village are you from, etc. We have this conversation. I mean, I don't have to explain this to anyone in this room. How are we going to go from there when ECOWAS fails to function after how many years? 40 years, 50 years? If you want to fly from Accra to Lagos, it's better to fly to London and come back. We are not in the position. So that people talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk. There isn't any movement. There's a road that they built now between Nigeria and Ghana. I'm not traveled with it, but just trying to cross the border is a challenge. Okay, let me give.
But Trump will force us. Trump is going to force us to do that.
But
he's going to now force us, because
if
the aid is not coming, if the aid is no longer coming, just give me a minute. If the aid is no longer coming, it means that it's not going to be business as usual. And our citizenry are becoming more politically aware, especially our young people. So our leaders cannot sit there and pretend to be doing business as usual. Otherwise, they will all be swept off.
Okay, let me give 3 minutes, because Charlie has just joined. So I want to give Charlie 3 minutes as well. So we are 10 minutes to the end of this program. Let's start with Winnie.
Interesting conversation you're having here on Pan-Africanism. And I just wrote it down, the Pan-African identity. And I believe the first time I when I was listening to Professor Isike, it just struck me that yes, there's a problem, and you're quite right. that identity is lacking, but the idea is good. The idea of having a common narrative and coming together and framing our conversation in a good way is amazing. But if we are to just anchor ourselves in the reality is that Trump is transactional. He prefers bilateral engagement. So my thinking on the way forward and opportunities that can be reached out to is the way we frame our narratives on what we need. And I was listening to something before I came here. Someone was saying that the US is not going to come to us and ask us, what do you want, Kenya? Where can you support you? Can we support you with a road or a rail, or what do you want? It's now our governments to look in, put together a very good business proposal, because this is business now. It's now time for business, and put together something that will benefit both you, your country, and the United States. And I keep circling back to tech. I believe that's the next frontier for African countries.
Yeah.
And finally, it is an amazing opportunity to reconstruct and restructure our relationship with foreign aid. I don't think that is far-fetched. This is an opportune time for African governments and even a very more informed citizenry to push for a more sustainable way of funding development. You still rely on foreign financing, but how can it be sustainable without debt and without being this fiddle, this tool that is being used by foreign actors to meet their interests? And finally, I was just thinking about what next, and with a few communities in the US feeling sidelined, like diversity, equity, and inclusion. I know it's a big deal, and you no longer want to talk about it, but there are communities that don't feel happy being in the United States, and the conversation about welcoming people from diaspora, using that as an opportunity to fund development is important. And here in Kenya, there's a big African American community that's coming in. And I'm just thinking, wow, okay, so that's another frontier and an opportunity to harness the knowledge and financing from people who no longer feel like they are at home in the US and could be more at home back in Africa. Yeah.
Okay, I know this is interesting. Okay, there's so many things that are popping up right now, and Zeal has to speak, and we have Charlie, who has just joined us, and our sole American voice who was busy, educating the youth of America. So, we should give him a chance to speak on behalf of the United States of America as well. So at least maybe he can offer us some sense from the insides, as it were. But first, let me. So, Charlie, do you want to say something quickly, and then let me pass it to Zeal, or?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you fine.
All right. Sorry to miss. I'm sure it was a dynamic debate and conversation. I was thinking back, I was on this panel, a month or so before the election. We made all kinds of predictions. I think almost none of them came true, except for the one about Trump meaning uncertainty, and just unclear exactly what the implications would be. And even now, after the election, it's still not entirely sure for America, for Africa, what is policy, what will actually happen, what will not. And I think a big conversation, I saw this in one of the comments in the chat just now, like one of the things that we're trying to figure out in the US even is, how much is going to be kind of enduring long-term change in terms of institutions, in terms of policy, versus what is going to come and go either after this administration or even during this administration. And so for African businesses in particular, I think there is upside. I'm hearing some things in terms of chances to reconsider and rethink relationships and developing domestic institutions and capabilities. But the reality is, I think, unfortunately, the U.S. is a much less reliable partner, and that probably will not change regardless of who the next president is. And because things
So we're looking at a structural shift. We're looking at a major shift in the way in which the world functions.
Yeah.
And maybe that's something for Africa. We are going to this Pan-African thing. It's really important. I realize that actually now we are onto a topic which is larger than this event. which might actually end up hijacking the last few minutes. But I want, before I give Zeal the word, let me just say that, Chris, you have something to say last time when we talked about the absence of a hegemon in Africa to make it happen. And that's what we need. Like we have Germany in Europe who's made the EU happen. In the same way, we had the United States post-war knocking heads together and so forth. So I want to see if I can squeeze that in the last 2 minutes. But Zeal, please add your own 2 bits here.
Okay, I will try and speak as quickly as possible. Something I found very interesting, I'm sure everybody's going to echo what I have to say, so I'm not going to repeat that. But one thing I'm going to say is I do remember a conference we attended regarding the credit spreads of African countries and the reason they were so high. And one of the reasons given at that time was the fact that African countries did not have what they called cross-governmental policy consistency. And they said every 4 years, if there's a new government, the previous government's policies and everything, that the country or the government doesn't have consistent policy, and those policies are hinged on the singular ideology of the leader, that a lot of African countries fall into that category, and therefore it increased credit risk and all of that, blah, 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 blah. It's amazing that in 5 weeks of swearing in Donald Trump, we are speaking of America regarding the ideology of a single individual. So yes, we have moved, we've seen it. The policy of America regarding Ukraine has changed. The policy of America regarding trade has changed. The policy of America regarding everything has changed based on a single individual's ideology. So the question is, will this be the trend going forward, or will the courts step in and create significantly more uncertainty? Because if they start reversing a lot of things the president is doing, so it becomes difficult for anybody to plan alongside anything that America is doing right now, because you can't really say if it will last. And that type of uncertainty from what is supposed to be a world power is very unsettling for me. So imagine changing your policy based on that, and then in 2 years, the courts reverse it, and then you've told some other continent to go F off or something. No. It's a tough one. Yeah.
No, this is a fascinating conversation. I have a feeling we have to do part 2 of this in next month. But 1 minute, we have 3 minutes, so they have 3 speakers. I myself will have spoken too much already. Let's start. Zeal, can I pass over to Winnie, then Chris, and then Charlie has the last word. How's that sound? Winnie,
I'm all talked up anyway.
I don't believe that, but anyway. Winnie.
Yes. Well, for me, I think this is just an opportunity for rethinking our frameworks, restructuring. I just want to circle back to, I see more opportunities than challenges for African governments, despite the uncertainty. And just to go back to Charlie's comments, there's still a lot of unknown. I think I wrote this, a lot has been said, but there's still room for much, much more. We turn on our TVs and there's a new story every day. And so it's quickly evolving. But again, I want to say this is an opportunity for rethinking how African governments and generally the African people deal with external partners. So thank you. I think I'll just end it there. I'll keep it short.
Okay, thank you. Chris.
Okay, I hope I try to keep it short. Yes, look, I just want to use my 1 minute to talk about the idea of regional group hegemony. And it is practicable because we have a lot of common African positions on major issues that have been the basis of multilateral engagements in the world, like I said before. So that tells me that we can actually agree on things despite the dysfunctionalities of our state systems that makes regional integration difficult. But we have a penchant, given our political history of colonialism and our idea of consensual democracy to discuss and agree. And so I'm thinking here that we don't have a hegemon like Narula said earlier on. We don't have a hegemon in the continent that can underwrite the provision of security and public goods to everyone. But we do have regional leaders in each of our sub-regions. So I'm talking here about the idea of what I call the group hegemonic leadership, where the different leaders in each of the region can come together, work through the African Union Commission to agree on a common position and a template for Africa-US relations. Because we've always had US-Africa relations, we've never had Africa-US relations. And I think that economics, trade, and investment is one area where we can all agree to say, look, there are so many small countries in Africa that cannot face up to Trump right now, America broadly. But there are countries that can come together on our behalf if we trust them to speak on our behalf, to go and present certain things to Trump that will benefit Africa broadly. If we can communicate to Trump that in doing business with Africa, we give you access to certain benefits that may make you compete with China for your own interest, Trump is very likely to buy that message and begin to rethink how he deals with Africa.
Okay. We're definitely doing a Pan-African conversation in a month's time, by the way. Charlie, you get to have the last word, 1 minute, and then we'll have to let people have dinner.
I feel like I don't even know what to say. It's like we could talk, we can speculate. There's just so much uncertainty from day to day. It's not even year to year. And I think for a lot of, again, think about it, especially bringing it down to the business level, not even country or regional relations. For the business level, trying to figure out new relationships, new supply chains, new links. Because I don't know if things like AGOA were brought up, but it's like relationships, markets that were counted on in the past might not be there, but there might be new opportunities and new markets, whether it's in the US or elsewhere, because again, Trump is open for business. It's a different kind of business. There will be winners and losers, and they might be different winners and losers than we've seen in the past. And so there's opportunities there, but also challenges in terms of the US-Africa relationship.
Thank you, Charlie. I think you bring up the last point, which almost got lost, is what does it mean for the average person? Uncertainty means costs. Costs are going to go up on every possible level. Inflation, whether it's price rises, inflation and price rise are not the same thing, but let's leave that for now. The point here is that this will feed into everyone's supply chain. The uncertainty in supply chains, uncertainty in tariffs, uncertainty in friendly relations with governments, and so on, immigration, transportation. This will have ramifications going on for a very long time. And of course, it means that for us in academia, we have a lot more talking to do, and we can write a lot more articles about it. In fact, Chris, we should talk about doing an article on Pan-Africanism for soon. But everyone, audience, thank you very much. I apologize that we haven't answered all the questions that came up. This has taken a life of its own. I'm really grateful. See you hopefully next month. We will go to part 2, part 3, part 4. We may be talking about this for the next 3 years and 250 days till Trump actually leaves office, inshallah. So with no further ado, please, everyone on the continent, please enjoy dinner. This will be up on our website. Welcome back to the Dunning Africa Center, where we believe in intensive conversation. I'm looking forward to seeing you all. Thank you so much.
Dunning Africa Center. It's not a place, it's a continent-wide conversation. Join us every month as we cover the pressing questions facing African businesses today.